Gute Woche. This afternoon, the Rebbe began the Farbrengen with the expression that the Rebbe has been using since the passing of the Rebbetzin, "V'hachai yiten el liboy," which means that after something happens, something undesirable, somebody passes away, Rambam quotes this pasuk that those that are alive, "V'hachai yiten el liboy." What is proper to do? The Chai, the Lebedike, should give it to their hearts. What says give it to their hearts? In other words, it's a proper, opportune time for us to evaluate our own selves and see how we could improve ourselves. And in fact, since the passing away of the Rebbetzin, the Rebbe has adopted this expression and is using it, say, practically at every occasion whenever the Rebbe speaks publicly. In fact, I think it came out to mention already, it was the first mincha which the Rebbe davened, the first mincha of Shiva. The Rebbe also quoted this pasuk, and at that time he added on, especially when the name of the Nifteres, her first name was Chaya. Also, before we go into the Siches, last night after davening, a message from the Rebbe came out that during the Farbrengens, throughout the year, the V'hachai yitein el liboy will always be explained on the first Rashi of the Sedra. In other words, the word V'hachai yitein el liboy, the Rebbe is using it basically as a term, the hoirah, the lesson. In other words, what we can do as far as practical doing, as far as hamainse hu ha'ikar, the Rebbe is expressing this in the words of V'hachai yitein el liboy. So, going back to this afternoon, the Rebbe began that we're talking lately about V'hachai yitein el liboy, and just like it is from something undesirable, what we have to do is bring it into desirable in Yonim. And how is that done? Through Torah. What is the main thing of Chayis by Yid? What is Lebedikheit by Yid? What brings Simche by Yid? Pekudei Hashem Yisharim Misamche Leiv. We all know the pasuk that through learning of Torah, that creates Simche, that creates joy by Yid. And we know the greatness and the importance of learning Torah. We know this right away from the first Perek in Tanya. First Perek in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe tells us the greatness of learning Torah. And Chas v'Shalom, how undesirable it is for the one that has an opportunity to learn and does not learn. So what we right away realize is the importance of learning Torah b'chlal. In learning Torah itself, we know there are various levels. There is the Gemara, Ure'ei Chayim Zu Torah. There's a pasuk, see life. So the Gemara interprets, what does it mean for a person to see life? With Torah, through Torah. Now the Rebbe in the Sikha, when he was talking about this inyan, did not explain specifically what he's referring to. But Chassidim, it's understood, Chassidim understand this based on a letter which the Rebbe wrote many years ago. Many years ago, the Rebbe wrote that when the Tzemach Tzedek's Rebbetzin passed away, the Tzemach Tzedek was very broken, extremely broken. And when his children realized how it affected their father, they told him, Tate, didn't you teach us, didn't you tell us that there is a Gemara based on a pasuk, Ure'ei Chayim im ha'isha? Pasuk is Navi. The pasuk there is discussing, literal translation is one seeing life, Ure'ei Chayim im ha'isha, through married life. Didn't you always tell us the Gemara that Chazal interpret this Gemara, Ure'ei Chayim Zu Torah? In other words, what were they telling their father? It was a situation after their mother passed away. The Tzemach Tzedek's Rebbetzin passed away. And the Tzemach Tzedek was very heartbroken. So what they were trying to relate to their father was that he can find his life, Ure'ei Chayim, where can he find it? Normally the taich is, where does a person find his life? It's the meaning of married life. But being that he was so broken of the passing of the Rebbetzin, so they told him, Tate, Ure'ei Chayim im ha'isha, so Chazal interpreted, Ure'ei Chayim Zu Torah. So in other words, telling their father that let him find his condolence, his nichumin in Torah. After they told this to Tzemach Tzedek tells them, children, bonai, nichamtoni. Your words have affected me. In other words, that the words of what the children told him have affected him to the extent that it brought out a condolence by the Tzemach Tzedek. Now today the Rebbe is referring to this same Gemara. Now obviously it's based on that incident. And the Rebbe is explaining what's the pshat. The Gemara says, Ura'ei chayim zu Torah. People were learning Torah until now also. Or let us understand if we're talking about the Tzemach Tzedek or the same situation, unfortunately now is by the Rebbe sein gesund. The taich is that being that in Torah there's constantly levels that one can strive and go higher and higher, deeper and deeper in the learning of Torah. So when we're talking about this level of learning Torah, which the pasuk is referring to, by Ura'ei Chayim, it is a yet higher level of learning Torah than the person has achieved until now. The Rebbe compared it. There's a famous maimah from the Frierdiker Rebbe, where the Frierdiker Rebbe begins a maimah on the Mishnah of Asara sheyoshvim va'iskim b'Torah shchina shruya b'neim. It's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that when 10 people are sitting together and are dwelling in Torah, they're actively involved in the learning of Torah, the Shechina is dwelling amongst them. This maimah is the first maimah which the Frierdiker Rebbe said and wrote after he was released from prison in 1927. And in that maimah the Rebbe brings out the greatness that's accomplished when 10 people learn Torah together. And as the Rebbe explained this afternoon, even though each and every one of them is a person who understands Torah very well, and understands Torah in the depth of Torah, and as the expression goes, Asik b'Torah. What's the taich Asik b'Torah? There's an expression, it's explained in the Bach, the commentary on Shulchan Aruch, and it's quoted in Chassidus very often. We say, in the morning, we say, La'asik b'divrei Torah. What's the pshat La'asik to? Asik means a business. A business is called an Asik. What's the pshat? We should have a business with Torah. Well, the expression should have been, we should learn Torah. Learn my Torah. Lehegois b'Torah, to learn Torah deeply. What's the pshat Asik b'Torah? So Chassidus explains, based on the Bach, there's a commentary in the Shulchan Aruch, who's a Pesach, halachic authority, that what's the difference between an employee and an employer? The difference is very simple. When there is an employee in a business, so after his day is over, he goes home, he's back to his own private life. Comes 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, or whatever time it is, he goes home, he's finished with his day's work. However, the employer really never finishes. Even if the place is closed, his business is closed, he's away from his business, his head is always in his business. That's the pshat when a person owns his own asik. It's his own business. His own business does not limit him to any hours. At all times it is his, and wherever he is, and under whatever circumstances it may be, he always has thoughts about his business. The same when we're talking about Torah. The association of a Yid to Torah has to be in what type of a way? Lasik b'divrei Torah. Torah has to be to him like his asik, his business. In other words, not the pshat, now is a time for learning, now is not a time for learning. Torah is dear to him, just like a person who owns his own business. I say now is a time, now is not a time. Naturally, everything has its time, but nonetheless, as far as his head and his mind on Torah, his head and his mind on Torah has to be at all times. So the Mishnah is talking about Asara sheyoshvim, 10 people that are sitting and learning Torah. And at what level are they learning Torah? The oiskim b'Torah. They're learning Torah as taka in a way of asik b'Torah. They are so heavily involved in Torah that Torah to them is like their asik is Torah. And nonetheless, we see that when these 10 people learn individually, separately, is ein zach, it's one thing. However, when these, no matter how deep they will be learning Torah, and when these 10 people join together, and it becomes a position of Asara sheyoshvim va'iskim b'Torah, then it reaches a special madrege of Shechina shruya b'nei. The Shechina can dwell amongst them. What's the pshat? Whenever Yid learns Torah, the Shechina is there. The Rebishter is there. The Rebishter is with every person that learns Torah. But here the taich is, it's a yet higher revelation of godliness when all of these 10 people join together. So we see that there are levels regarding Torah. There are levels in the way of learning Torah, and there are levels in the revelation of godliness, of a lakus to the person or to the people while learning Torah. The same the Rebbe is concluding when we're talking about the inyan of V'achai yiten aliboy, or Re'ei Chaim. Re'ei Chaim, and Chazal interpreted Zu Torah. This means achieving a higher level of Torah that was reached and achieved in Torah. So that is why the Rebbe using the expression in the Sikha. Says even though this Farbrengen is taking place in an unusual time, normally, in other words, this Shabbos wouldn't be a time of a Farbrengen. But again, being that it has to do with this inyan of V'achai yiten eliboy, it is an opportune time to utilize the V'achai yiten eliboy in the inyan of Torah, and especially in the inyan of Asara sheyesh v'vaiskim b'Torah. In other words, learning Torah. Learning Torah, and what's the inyan of a Farbrengen? In the Farbrengen we have much more than 10 people that are participating in the learning of Torah. So Memela, we are accomplishing this high level of Asara sheyesh v'vaiskim b'Torah shchina shchiyah b'nei. Then the Rebbe continued the Farbrengen that this Shabbos is Shabbos Parsha Tazria-Metzora. And we all know the famous word from the Alter Rebbe. The Rebbe has taught us that we have to live with the times. In other words, as interpreted, we have to take a lesson, derive lessons from the Parshas HaShavua. We say that this week is Tazria and Metzora together. In other words, there are years when it could be Tazria and Metzora separately, and it is so al pi Torah. In other words, Tazria is a separate Sedra, and Metzora is a separate Sedra. Comes this Shabbos this year, Rebbe stresses this thing in you many times, it does not mean that we are reading two Sedras. It means that this year, Tazria and Metzora become one Sedra. And that is why you notice that we call up one person, for example, the person who's called up to Revi, he begins in Tazria. He says his first bracha, his opening bracha, he says in Tazria. And his closing bracha, he says, we're in Metzora. That means his aliyah is such type of an aliyah which combines the two sedras. But this week, it's not the pshat, it's two sedras. This week, it's one long sedra, which is called Tazria-Metzora. That's the title of this week's sedra. If we were to look in and touch up the meaning of the word Tazria and the meaning of the word Metzora, we will notice that they are contradictory concepts. What's the type Tazria? Tazria is that Isha ki Tazria v'yoldo zocha. Woman will give birth, she will give birth to a boy. What does it bring out? The entire concept of the upkeep of the world. The Rebbe uses the expression L'sheves Yitzara. The world is created so that the people should multiply in the world, Pru'urvu, Milu Esaretz, and fill up the world, Vikavshu, and to conquer the world. And as we see in the pasuk, the expression V'yolda Zocha. What do Chazal explain regarding the difference between a Zocher and a Keva? Chazal use the expression Zocher is an ish, a man, a male. Shadarkoi lichboish. The nature of a person is a male is more aggressive than a female, and the derech, the custom of a male is lichboish, to conquer. So Tazria right away brings out the concept of filling up the world. L'sheves Yitzara, positive concept, which is brought out through the Seder of Tazria. What is Metzora? Metzora is the complete opposite. Right away, if we were to touch up the word Metzora, what's touch the word Metzora? Metzora has in it the word Ra, evil, and as Chazal interpret, not only that, but Moitzi Shem Ra. It's referring who is plagued with Metzora, the person who has spoken Lashon Hara, who has spoken Shem Ra. And that is why, what is the punishment for him? Bodod Yeshev Mechutz Lamachne. He's seated alone, outside of all the camps of Eden, and that is where the Metzora is kept. So the concept of seating him isolated, away from anyone, this is a contrary concept to the idea of Kiyum Olam, of the upkeep of the world, of L'sheves Yitzara. On the contrary, we're saying a person, we isolate him, we keep him separate. He's not even allowed to be involved in the inyanim of the upkeep of the L'sheves Yitzara of the world. So we have two opposite concepts. Not only are they opposite, contradictory concepts, Tazria and Metzora, and here we say that both of these inyanim are combined in one Sedra. How does this go hand in hand? The Rebbe brings out that bichlal we know that there's a concept of sur meira and there's a concept of asay toiv. There's that idea of staying away from the ra, from the evil. That's number one. That's step one. Normally, once a person has succeeded in keeping away from the ra, then the next step is asay toiv, getting involved in the positive, to do the good, to associate with good. Same thing is brought out in an expression of Chazal. There is yemin mikareves usmoil deiche. The right hand that brings close, the left hand that pushes away. In other words, there are inyanim that have to be brought close, and there are inyanim that we have to push away from ourselves, which is again sur meira and asay toiv. Under normal circumstances, these are two steps in Aveda that go in the Seder. What is the regular Seder of this Aveda? First is sur meira, then is asay toiv. However, now we are living in such an era when we are waiting for the coming of Mashiach. We don't longer have the time to say that first we will be involved in the sur meira. Once we are successful in sur meira, later we will do the asay toiv. There's no more time for that. Memela, we have to chaparain and do whatever possible. Sur meira, asay toiv, altstaf mirton, everything has to be done. So this is the combination of Tazria and Metzora. Tazria brings out the concept of the asay toiv. Metzora brings out the idea of the sur meira. So we say that now Tazria and Metzora are combined. What does that mean in Avodah? In Avodah, this means that now we have no time to set a time. This is the time for sur meira. After we will be successful, the sur meira, and we will be finished with sur meira, that is when we will get involved in the asay toiv. Now we have no time for that. Now we have to chaparain. The Rebbe always uses an expression from the Rebbe Rashab based on a Gemara. Now is a time of chatoif v'achoil, chatoif v'ishti. Grab the food and grab the drink. We have no time to sit back and relax. We have to do things as fast as possible. So Mamela, the same thing is reflected in the combination of these two sedras that become one sedra this year. And they become one sedra, and what is the title of the sedra? Tazria-Metzora. Rabbi mentioned in the Sikha there are many communities that don't even refer to the sedra with the title of Metzora. They don't want to bring out this word. It's a negative concept. So in many communities, this sedra is called Parshas Tahara. It's a parsha which discusses purity of people. But nonetheless, we know the name of the Seder is Tazria-Metzora. And here we say that Tazria-Metzora, which is the concept of sur meira and asay toiv, both of these inyanim come combined. Why do they come combined? Because it is now a time that we have to be involved in all of the inyanim. We have to be involved in sur meira as well as in asay toiv, and all of it simultaneously at the same time. The Rebbe continued with explaining a Rashi in this week's Sedra. As mentioned earlier, Rebbe said that he will explain the first Rashi of the Sedra. So he learned the first Rashi of the Sedra, but together with it, before that, actually, he also explained one of the Rashis in the middle of the parasha. Kapitel Yud Gimel, Pasuk Yud Beis, which is relatively the beginning of the Sedra. There is an expression regarding the Metzora. It's in Parshas Tazria. If the tzara should cover his entire body, meroishe v'adragla, from head to toe, it has to be shown to the kohen. L'chol marei einei hakoyin. It has to be shown to l'chol marei einei hakoyin. If we were to look into Rashi, and Rashi explains what does it mean l'chol marei einei hakoyin. Rashi says it comes to exclude prat lekoyen shechoshach ma'oiroi, a koyen whose vision is darkened. That's how we would teach it. Choshach ma'oiroi. Rabbi says it's not the first time here in these psukim that it is mentioned that the kohen has to see the Metzora. Right away, as soon as the Torah starts talking about the Metzora, right thereafter, in the third pasuk, the Ra Kohen. Pasuk says that the Kohen has to see it. So Rashi does not touch up that what Kohen should see, a Kohen that could see. Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi waits quite a few psukim. And it comes here to this pasuk, where the pasuk uses the expression lechol mare einei hakoyin, for the entire vision of the koyin. This is where Rashi says it comes to exclude what type of koyin, a koyin whose vision is darkened. He cannot analyze this mitzvah. Why is Rashi waiting until now? There were quite a few psukim until now. We're in pasuk Yud Beis, and from pasuk Beis, the Torah's in this kapitel, we're talking about the tzaras, and right after, in the pasuk Beis, it is said he's brought to the kohen, and pasuk Gimel right away goes on v'tvara kohen, that the kohen is seeing him, and Rashi doesn't say anything. And throughout the psukim, it's mentioned quite a few times. V'ra kohen, v'ra kohen. Rashi, the Torah keeps on repeating the concept that the kohen sees him, and Rashi doesn't say anything. It comes here in pasuk Yud Beis to the expression of lechol mare einei hakoyin. Rashi is telling us, you know what kind of kohen could evaluate? Only a kohen who has a good eye vision, whose vision is proper. But the one who is choshach ma'oiroi, his vision is weakened, he cannot evaluate and analyze this mitzvah. That's number one. Number two, there's another question. Every word in Rashi is extremely accurate. Now, true, Rashi and Chumash does not paskin halachas. It's not a halacha sefer. But nonetheless, when Rashi says something, he wants it to be brought out very clear so that the child who's learning Chumash will understand it. How do we teach up prat lekoyen shechoshech ma'orei, a kohen whose vision is darkened? Simply, it means somebody who's blind. So there's an easier word to use. There's a word summa. Summa means blind in Hebrew. So Rashi should have said, this could be brought to any kohen, but to a kohen who's blind, because the kohen who's blind cannot evaluate it. But Rashi doesn't use this word summa. Rashi uses a longer expression, in fact, and again we know that every word in Rashi is accurate. And Rashi is not out to save words when it's negated to the explanation of the inyan. And here Rashi is using a longer expression. Kohen shechoshach ma'orei, a kohen whose vision has darkened. So the Rebbe is learning, this is taka accurate in Rashi. Rashi does not mean a blind kohen, because naturally a blind kohen is excluded from the beginning. The roa kohen, a kohen has to see, and if he's blind and he cannot see, so this is the simple taich in the pasuk. We don't even have to come on to Rashi to tell us that a blind kohen can't analyze a mitzvah. He's not blind. We have to have the roa kohen. Here, what the pasuk is talking about here, paroyach tifchach hatzaras, it's a different level in tzaras. This is a type of a tzaras which will cover the person meiroishay ve'ad raglo, from head to toe. This has to be seen by what and analyzed by what type of a kohen? By a kohen whose vision is like a strong vision. We're not talking about the blind. The blind definitely not. There's a possibility of a kohen that choshach ma'orei, a kohen whose vision is darkened, meaning simply he doesn't see well. So the question arises, could a kohen that does not see well analyze this type of a tzaras, which the pasuk is talking about in pasuk Yud Beis, which is a different level of tzaras, a different stage of tzaras, which was discussed till now. Here we're talking about a tzaras which has covered the person from head to toe. So therefore here you need a kohen that Pashut could see better. You need a kohen that has a strong vision. However, a kohen that choshach ma'orei does not mean that he's blind. Chas v'shalom doesn't mean a summa. Otherwise, Rashi would say that. Choshach ma'orei means his vision is darkened. Memela, he doesn't see well. He doesn't see well. As for such type of a tzaras, he cannot be used. So again, we see how every word in Rashi is accurate. Until now, Rashi did not have to say this because the taka was not negated. However, now we're talking about a type of tzaras which has to be l'chol marayene hakoyen. Has to be l'chol marayene hakoyen, meaning that a kohen who sees perfectly and not choshech moyer. Now the Rebbe went a step further in this thing. There's an expression in these psukim, zois toiras negatzaras, whether it's here or further. So Chazal interpret on this pasuk that there's a complete Torah, it's a complete knowledge for the Kohanim to be able to analyze the tzaras. And it seems that not every Kohen knew simply, did not have the knowledge of analyzing the tzaras. So the question arises, what will be if the Kohen himself does not know the details? However, another Kohen, he's lacking the knowledge of Toiras HaTzaras. However, another Kohen who is well versed in Tzaras is helping him and telling him. So the Rebbe got into this shaila, and the Rebbe explained there is nothing wrong with it, as long as it's coming out through the Kohen, and it's coming from a Kohen who is versed in the Toiras HaTzaras, who does know the Toiras HaTzaras, and when he relates it to another Kohen, and he's bringing it out to the other Kohen, there's nothing wrong with it. Rebbe compared this, if we find, weiter in the Torah, we find the halachas of a ben soirer or moira, a child who disobeys his parents, and all the details of which the Torah describes him. He steals and does not listen to his father and to his mother. So there the Torah also uses the expression that he should be brought by his parents to the Beis HaMikdash, he should be brought, and all the details that the Torah relates regarding it. So Chazal also say, what's pshat he should be brought? It has to be from such parents that could bring him. If his parents cannot bring him, his parents do not have hands. To such an extent. Then the halachas then those halachas are not in effect. So the Rebbe is like comparing it also, that at times we see that there are certain physical situations of the people involved in a particular halachic case, that their gashmistic situation affects the halacha. Just in the same thing over here. Here we need a kohen that sees well, and not a kohen that choshech moir. Now let us go back to the first Rashi in the Sedr, which as the Rebbe uses the expression, this is the v'hachai yiten eliboy, which he explains from the Parsha and Chumash. Sedr begins with Isha ki Tazria. Amar Rab Simloi, the quotation of Rab Simloi, Kishem sheyitzirose shalodom, acha kol beheima chayev oif, just like a person was created after every beheima chayev oif. First, all behemoths and chayes and insects were created. Then man was created. B'maisa bereishis, in the creation of the world. Kach teirosoi, the same thing regarding the halachas of the person. Nisparsha are explained. Acha teiras behema chayev oif. Last week in Parsha Shmini we learned all the behemoths chayes v'oifes that are kosher and non-kosher. And now we are coming to discuss the person. When the person is should we use the same expression, kosher and non-kosher. In other words, when a person is permitted to be amongst people, and when he's in the category of a Metzora and has to be separated, bodad yeshin. Which this is a quotation which Rashi brings from Chazal, said in the name of Rab Simloi. Rabbi says, this quotation, this saying, is not understood. What do we say? We compare, just like it was in creation, the same thing is in Torah. Aren't we taught different? Aren't we taught that we have to compare creation to Torah? Aren't we always taught in Chassidus to compare all the worldly inyanim, that to inyanim of Welt should follow Torah? Torah is the pattern. In fact, how did the Rebbe create the world? The world, Torah was difterois, upinkesois. What was the blueprints for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to create the world? Torah. So first comes Torah. And Just like an Indian is in Torah, we can copy and do the same in Welt. Here, Reb Simloi is telling us the opposite. What is Reb Simloi telling us? Just like it was by creation is Welt. Just like it was by bringing Inyanim, revealing these Inyanim into the world. And just like over there, man was created last. As we all know, the Chazal, which Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya, Yatush Kodmach, that it is said to a person who sins, that Yatush, meaning a small creature, was even created before him, had priority to the person, before man. So we say, just like it was in creation, the same thing it is in Torah. Shouldn't it be the opposite? Torah should be come first, and creation should copy the way it is in Torah. And here we see that Reb Simloi is saying the opposite. So here the Rebbe brought out the entire Inyan, how we're talking, how it is the Avodah in Welt. How is the Avodah of a Yid? The Avodah of a Yid is, the Rebbe used the expression, Mipsori echzer lekah. It's a pasuk which is often quoted in Chassidus. Through my flesh, I will see godliness. What's mentus? It means when a person rises in the morning and he sees how the neshama was returned to him, and he starts off his day in the right and proper way by the first thing expressing moidani lifanecha, which is an expression of heidah and bittul, a total. See, this explains what's the meaning of moide, or the same thing we find later, the beginning of davening hoidu lashem. That's an inyan we admit. What's the pshat of admitting? Admitting is a level where we put our understanding aside. It's an inyan of hoidah. Hoidah, as see, this goes a step further, it's the inyan of bittul, our giveaway, our total layaway to the Rebishter. Right away we start our day. How do we start our day? With an acceptance of bittul to the Rebishter. That's how a Yid starts his day. And that's the mipsari echselaka. In other words, a Yid has to start his day, now that the Rebishter has created us, and we are in such a situation here in the Welt, we are taking it that from Welt, through Welt, we are dealing the Rebishter. In other words, it is mipsari, through flesh, echselaka, I am seeing godliness. V'meila, it is through inyonim gashmiyim that we are serving the Rebishter. And this is the same concept that Reb Simloi brings out. Kishem sheyitzirasi shel adam. First comes the inyan of Yitzirah. In other words, it's through the Gashmis, the Kinyanim, through Olam, this reflects also in Torah. But the Rebbe used the expression, the Talmid Memulach, which means the bright student is still not satisfied with this interpretation. To satisfy him, Rashi mentions, who is the one that said this? This was said by Reb Simloi. Usually, when Rashi does quote a Chazal, Rashi does not mention who was the Tana or the Amira that said this specific thing. And should Rashi say it, then it is only for the reason that we can understand the pshat in the quotation, in the explanation better, because we know who says this. Otherwise, Rashi's inyan is pshat. As far as pshut shel mikra, even when Rashi brings a Gemara, Rashi brings a Medrash, or whatever it may be, to understand the pshat and the pasuk, it's irrelevant to know who was the Tana or the Amira that said it. In the cases where we do find that Rashi does mention who said it, so it is because it's negeya, it helps to understand. It helps to understand what the Tana or Amira is trying to bring out. Here Rashi is telling us who is the one that said it. Reb Simloi. What said Reb Simloi? There's something else that is said by Reb Simloi. He said something else also. So there's a saying in Chazal by Reb Simloi that when a child is in his mother's womb, the child is taught the entire Torah. But later, Bo Malach, an angel comes, the Satri al Piv, and gives him like a little touch in his face, and by that, he forgets. What is Reb Simloi bringing out? That what is the way beginning of a child? Before the child gets ready to come into the Welt, it is Taket Torah. So in other words, this same Reb Simloi, who's bringing out here, that we're following a pattern of Kishem Sheyitzirasi Shel Adam, Achal Kol Beheim Chaya V'Oif, The same thing, Teirasa is also Achakol Behem Echayavois. But remember, this same Rab Simloi is also telling us that what is the first thing that a child comes into contact with, even before, as the child is getting ready to come down into this world, even before the child sees the world. What is the child being filled with? Torah. The same Rab Simloi is stressing that first and foremost what comes? The inyan of Torah. The only thing, the child forgets it. What's a pshat forget? Rabbi says, we see it by children. We see it by people, by adults as well. When a person learns something, and later he forgot it. But then you come across a situation where you remind him. You remind the child or you remind the adult. So the response of the child or the adult is, the Rebbe expressed himself, aha! I remember it. Aha! It kind of like starts coming back to him. What does this show? That when something is forgotten, it really never parts from the person. It really remains there. But the only thing, unless he's reminded, he doesn't remember it. But really it remains within him. The same thing, when we are saying that a child in his mother's womb goes through the entire Torah, but until a malach comes, the sotre al piv, the malach gives him like a smack across his face, and by that, across his mouth, and and by that the child forgets it. The child taka forgets it, but it remains with him. But Mela, what do we see? That even before the child is really born, the first thing, what does a child have a shaykhs with? Torah. It is customary that the Rebbe also explains in the summer weeks a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. In fact, it was after a lengthy explanation in the Parsha of both Rashes, and the Rebbe also explained the Zoya. The Rebbe also referred to the Shiurim and Rambam. Shiurim and Rambam, it is in the Rambam in the end of the halachas of Macholos Asuris, foods that we are prohibited to eat. And there the Rambam brings psukim, several psukim which are brought in Chumash, where the Torah brings out the sanctity that Yidden possess. The kedusha which the Rebbe puts into Yidden. So the Rebbe brought out that we find in the Rambam, in the Sefer HaMitzvahs of the Rambam, in Shoirish Daled, in the 4th chapter of Rules and Regulations, what is considered a mitzvah and what is not considered a mitzvah. The Rambam explains which psukim in Torah are considered mitzvahs as far as one of the 613 mitzvahs, and at times we have psukim in the Torah that are not considered one of the 613. And there the Rambam says that when the Torah tells us that you shall be holy and sanctified, and the Rebbe is saying he's putting kedusha into Yidden, these psukim are really not one of 613 mitzvahs. When we're talking about mitzvahs, it means a specific commandment. When the Torah is using general terms of v'nikdashti, v'yisem k'doshim, and general concepts which bring out sanctity that the Rebbe has instilled within Yidden, this is not referring to any specific mitzvah. The Rebbe was explaining it the way the Rambam explains it in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, and referring to specific psukim. There are other psukim which are brought here in the Rambam, where the Rambam discusses the halachas of a macholas asuras, where the Torah has told us to refrain and stay away from certain foods. Why? Because the Rebbe wants us to remain Kaddish. We should remain in a certain level of sanctity and not to make ourselves impure by eating these prohibited foods. So it's again, the Rambam here is again quoting psukim of sanctity that is supposed to prevail amongst Yidden. But again, the Rambam is just using these psukim to bring out the general idea of kedusha which Yidden have. But it does not mean that these psukim are specific mitzvahs in the count of the 613 mitzvahs. Because going back to what the Rambam says in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, where in Yonim are discussed general concepts are not specific mitzvahs. Kedusha is a general idea which is going on by Yidden, but it doesn't mean it's a specific mitzvah. In this inyan, one inyan led to another. The Rebbe was explaining, we know there's a concept how a disciple, a Talmud, is supposed to act to his Rav. Now, on one hand, we find that a Talmud a disciple adds to the knowledge of the Rav. There's an expression, ha-talmid ha-machkim es rabbi. When a Rav has good talmidim, they bring out by the Rav more in depth that the Rav should have to dwell deeper into, because they ask proper questions. And the Rav is dwelling deeper into the sugya of Torah. So this is the concept of mitalmida yoisa mikulam. What? There's a Chazal. Chazal say, harbe, well, the Chacham said, harbe lamadati merabba. Yisai, a lot I've learned from my teachers, yet more I learned from my friends. However, the most I've learned from my students. What's meant to the most I've learned from my students? Simply, because when one is blessed with good students, and the students ask proper, intelligent questions, so this leads the Rav that he really has to dwell into the inyan properly, so that he should be able to relate to the students properly. Push it. On the other hand, there's an inyan by a Talmud that is not sufficient, that the Talmud is learning from his Rav, but there's also a need for the Talmud to be mishamesh his Rav, to serve his Rav. Rabbi brought a Gemara, also relating to the Tanoim, one of the Talmidim once said that he has carried the clothes for his Rebbe, for his teacher, to the Beis HaMerchetz, to the place, to the bath place, to the mikveh. He has carried his clothes for him there. In other words, it went to such an extent he was proud of this fact that he carried his clothes, the clothes for his Rav, for his master, for his Rebbe, the one who was teaching him Torah. He carried him to the Merchetz. Rabbi explained today, was meant das? Rabbi explained it in Ruchnius. What's the meaning of Merchetz? Merchetz is the type where one washes up. Have to wash up. Wash up. It's meant in Gashmias, but there's also the Ruchnius, the Kinyan of Merchetz. In other words, we are cleaning ourselves to reach to a higher madreg. What's the pshat? The Talmud that's following with his Rebbe. When the Rebbe is going to the Beis HaMerchetz with his Rav, and he's carrying the clothes for him to the Beis HaMerchetz, and this is affecting an elevation in the student that is doing this as well. Why? Because the whole union of Merchetz is an area. We wash ourselves so that we should become yet higher spiritually. Washing ourselves spiritually so we become more clean spiritually. And the Talmud who's carrying the clothes for his Rebbe to the Beis HaMerchetz, now naturally it's affecting the Talmud as well, so that the Talmud is also being uplifted in a yet higher spiritual level. So after the Rebbe explained this inyan, and he also explained the inyan in the Zohar, Rebbe said, now we're going to go to the Pirkei Avos. But before we go to Pirkei Avos, the Rebbe suggested it would be a good idea to sing a nigun, so the nigun will wake up those that have to be waken up, so that they should be able to join in with us to listen to the explanation on Pirkei Avos. In Pirkei Avos, it's the beginning of the second Perek. Now, Rebbe says, Rebbe Omer, the second Perek begins, Rebbe Omer, Rebbe says, Eizehu derech yishara, what is the right path, sheyavir lo ha'adam, that a person should choose. And he gives an answer. Kol shehi tiferes lo yiseha v'tiferes lo min ha'adam. That which is honorable to himself and brings him honor from man. Who is saying this? Rebbe. Rebbe is Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, who was the author of Mishnah. And he was such a giant in Torah that he gained this title, Rebbe. He's everyone's Rebbe. Everyone refers to him in his generation and in later generations that what is his title? We don't even refer to him by name. His name was Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. When we say Rebbe Omer, we automatically mean him. So what does he tell us? What's the gewaldige Eitzah that he's telling us? He's giving us an Eitzah. You should know what is the proper path for a person to choose. Something which is honorable to himself and brings honor from man. Why does he get involved in such type of questions? If the question arises, what is the proper thing for a person to do? The answer should be, he should follow the derech of Torah. Why is he phrasing it? Tiferes lo yiseha, tiferes lo min ha'adam, it's honorable for him and brings him honor from men. If he's asking the question, what is the proper path that a person should choose? A proper path that a person should choose is the path of Torah. And when a person will be following the path of Torah, that will be the proper path. Incidentally, the Rebbe notes, this quotation, the first Mishnah, is a quotation of Rebbe. If we look to the second Mishnah, it's a quotation of Rabbi Gamliel, Benoi shel Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. So first comes the quotation of father, and then the Mishnah follows with a quotation of Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. But getting back to our Mishnah, it's Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi with this title, this outstanding title that he gained, Rebbe. What's the great advice that he's giving? Question arises, what is the proper path for a person to choose? Is was emphater? What is he answering on that? That a person should choose something which brings honor to him and is honor from man. Give him a simple answer. A person doesn't know what path to choose, he should choose the path of Torah. Rebbe brought out and explained this whole Inyan, a very deep explanation. He says, Bechlau we know, that the Rebbe gave Yidden the Torah. The Rebbe gave Yidden, told Yidden that he's giving them the Torah, and the response from Yidden was, Nase v'nishma. We will do, and we will listen. So we know that Chazal make a big issue, and give a lot of credit to the Yidden for the fact that Yidden responded in such a warm way. What did they say? They said, Nase, they were makdim, Nase l'nishma. First they said, we will do, and then they said they will listen, which basically brings out the concept of Kabbalah soil, the acceptance of the yoke of the Rebishter, that we're putting our understanding aside, and we will do what the Rebishter tells us to, regardless whether we understand or we don't understand. So the question arises, Nase, very good. What's about Nishma? Why should there be a Nishma altogether? In other words, if we are following what the Rebishter wants us to do, and we are living up to a standard of Kabbalah soil, if we're living up to a standard of Kabbalah soil, then all we have to do is Nase. We will do. The Nishma is already part of the Nase. Naturally, we have to hear so that we should know what to do. So in the Nase, automatically Nishma is included. Why do we spell out again Nishma? In the Taich, we will do Nase. However, we are saying Nishma, we also want to understand. So the question arises, why? Let us do everything in a frame of total Nase and a total Kabbalah soil. And let us put our Nishma, which Nishma means understanding, let us put the Nishma aside. We will do whatever the Rebbe tells us to do. This is an expression from the Alter Rebbe. Look at the Torah. Alter Rebbe uses an expression that Kabbalah soil of a Yid goes so far to such an extent that Ilu nitztavinu lachtoich eitzim, if the Rebbe would have commanded us to chop wood, we would chop wood. In other words, a Yid is ready to do whatever the Rebbe tells him to. What's the pshat? We are saying Nishma, there's room for understanding. Chassidus explains that the Rebbe Shtaka wants that a Yid should understand also. As far as his understanding reaches, Dav Takazain he should understand. In other words, the Rebbe will that the Rebbe wants, it is the will of Hashem, it is the desire of Hashem, that the Yid should serve the Rebbe mitzad the level of whatever his capacity of understanding is, he has to give that to Hashem. And here the Rebbe goes a step further. Chazal discuss the union of serving the Rebbe b'chol levavcha. What's the pshat b'chol levavcha? B'shnei yitzarecha, with both of our yitzars. Side the Yetzer Tov and side the Yetzer Hara. What does this mean? That Torah wants that a Yid should serve the Rebishter at such a level that he's serving him together with his Yetzer Hara. And the Rebbe brought in here interesting. The Gemara says that David HaMelech said, it's brought in Tanya, V'libi cholol b'kirbi. There's some, his heart, there's cholol means a dead person, a dead body. There's someone dead in his heart. What's it gemeint? He meant his Yetzer Hara. His Yetzer Hara was no longer existent. As Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, he killed his Yetzer Hara. Shehorgei b'tainis. He fasted that much that he killed his Yetzer Hara. Through Tanesim, it affected her to kill the Yetzer Hara. It says, however,
if we're going a step further, this is not the final stage of Avodah. The final stage of Avodah is not that the Yetzer Hara should be killed and not exist and not be there any longer. The final stage of Avodah is that with the Yetzer Hara one serves the Rebishter. And here the Rebbe compared this, Chazal say regarding a Nazir. Nazir means a person who accepts upon himself that he will not drink wine. So Chazal used the expression, he's considered a sinner, a choitei. Why? Shetziyar atzmei min hayayin. He was zich mitzayer, he caused himself, he brought upon himself something additional which is not required al pi Torah, that he will not drink wine. And Chazal view this, Chazal interpreted that it's considered a sin. Why? Because if the Torah says we are permitted to drink wine, and through drinking wine serve the Rebishter. In other words, all Gashmiistik Inyanim, which we are permitted to have, we should have them, we should do them, and through these Inyanim serve the Rebishter. So that's the type. There's a level of Nasa, which is Kabbalah soil. Naturally, this is first and foremost. However, together with it comes Nishma. What's the ringe from Nishma? Nishma here means we hear, we listen, we understand. The Torah Taka wants that as far as our understanding could reach, we should Taka use our understanding. Now, naturally, once we come to a level where we have to come on to Kabbalah soil, Kabbalah soil. But prior to that, the Torah wants we should use the Nishma. And this is the same thing what the Rebbe is saying. The Rebbe is saying, Eizehi derech yishara sheyaver le'ha'adam. What is the proper path for a person to choose? The Torah wants that the Avodas Hamata, the Avodah from the person mitzad himself has to choose a path. He has to choose a path. What is the right path that he wants to do? And put himself and his understanding and whatever he possesses, all the qualifications and gifts that the Rebbe has given him, he has to put all of this into his level, his realm of understanding. And this is the beginning of Perik Beis. What is Perik Beis? Comes after Perik Aleph. Here is Aleph and there is Beis. Let's see this, it's explained what's the chilik of Aleph and Beis. Or rather, Nisan and Iyar, which is also Aleph and Beis. Nisan is the first month, Iyar is the second month. So Chassidus explains, Nisan is a gilui, a revelation, milmayla lamata. The Rebishter has revealed himself to Yidden in Mitzrayim, and the Rebishter has taken Yidden out of Mitzrayim at the time Yidden were in a matzev where Yidden were not worthy of being taken out of Mitzrayim. As Chazal tell us, Halolu oiv Avodah Zarah, v'halolu oiv Avodah Zarah. The Yidden were worshipping Avodah Zarah, the Mitzrim were worshipping Avodah Zarah. There was no difference between Yidden and Mitzrim. And nonetheless, the Rebishter came, has revealed himself and has taken us out of Mitzrayim. So what is the inyan of Rishon? The inyan of Rishon is a gilui, a revelation, milmayla lemata, from up, down, from Hashem to us. What is Chodesh Hasheni? Chodesh Hasheni is the month of Iyar. The month of Iyar, it's explained in Chassidus at length, that's the month of Sfiras HaOmer. Now that the Rebishter has taken us out of Mitzrayim, we are counting Omer every day, and we are preparing ourselves to Matan Torah. Now, who is doing this Avodah? Yidden are doing this Avodah. This is already a month of Avodah milmata l'mayla. It's the matter, the Yid, who is doing the Avodah milmata l'mayla. We are, Chassidus explains at length what's the whole meaning of Sfiras HaOmer. Sfiras HaOmer has to do with the midas within a person. Person possesses 7 general midas, and these 7 general midas are divided into 7 detailed midas. 7 times 7 is 49. So the 49 days of Sfira means we are purifying our midas so that we should be ready to Kabbalah Satira. So what is the inyan of Chodesh Hasheni? Sheni is the Avodah of Milmata L'mayla. This is why this comes at the beginning of Perik Sheni. Perik Rishon is Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai. Moshe received Torah from Sinai. It was a revelation from Hashem. The Rebishter came down to the Yidden and gave Torah. Now we are coming into a level of Sheni. What is Sheni? We got already our gift. Now we have to serve back the Rebishter. Now we even have to show what we could do. So what does Perik Sheni begin with? What is the proper path for man to choose? How does man respond to this Gilui of Milmaila Lamata, which came to the Gilui of Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai, to this revelation? How do we respond now? Milmata Lamaila. The Rebbe concluded this inyan. He says, this is Perik Rishon, and then we go into Perik Sheni. Let this be an introduction for Shlishi. What do we mean by Shlishi? Let this Aveda lead to the Gili, to the revelation of the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi. We already had two Batei Mikdash, and we were already twice in Golas. Now let us go out of this Golas, a final Yitziyah of Golas, a final end to Golas, and we will come to Shlishi, which is the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi. The Rebbe also reminded in the Farbrengen that being that we are before Lag Baimer is a proper day to be utilized properly, and primarily utilizing the day of bringing together children. Naturally, it should be done in a proper way, wherever mechitza is required, or similar type of division between men and women, or boys and girls. It should be done. In other words, it should be done in the proper way, in accordance al pi halach, in accordance al pi shulchan aruch. But again, to utilize this day properly, it's a day that has to be utilized to bring together children in the union of miftzayim. It was throughout the Farbrengen, one of the sichas, offhand I don't recall where, the Rebbe demanded very strongly the inyan of afatzas hamayonis, spreading the wellsprings of Chassidus. The Rebbe says, comes Nasi Deirenu, Rebbe Nasi of our generation, and demands from Chassidim that Chassidim have to take the mayon. You take the well, which is the source of Chassidus. And what do we say? That with this well, you have to reach out to what type of an area? To an area that is called chutzah. Torah tells us that this area is chutzah. In other words, it's outside. And it's not sufficient that we bring Yiddishkeit there. It's not sufficient that to the one who is still at the level of chutzah, we familiarize him with the observance of Torah mitzvahs. What is our obligation? To take from the mayon, from the source, from the well. What is that? The union of Torah Chassidus, simply the learning of Chassidus, and see to it that we reach out with the learning of Chassidus to what type of Yidden? To Yidden that are still in a level of chutzah. They are called outsiders. Why? Because they have no shaykhs as yet to this whole union. And we take the mayon, the source, the well of Chassidus, and bring it to them, and bring them close to Chassidus. And this is what is demanded from us very strongly at this day and age.